Hello, my name is Nick Sproull. I've been a barrister for 28 years and I'm the head of the matrimonial finance team at Albion Chambers in Bristol. Also with me in this video is Gemma Borkowski, who has been a barrister for 15 years and also sits as a deputy district judge. We are going to talk through one particular issue facing people getting divorced at the moment, namely how to deal with a business suffering in the crisis, which has become difficult or impossible to value. And we are going to suggest one possible solution. These are troubled and troubling times for the country. COVID-19 has affected every one of us, not least those who are trying to access our courts, including those going through a divorce. Divorce is, of course, a traumatic and difficult process to go through at the best of times. And many people are finding that in the current crisis, their divorce cannot be finalised, often due to uncertainty surrounding the value of their assets, leaving them trapped in a marriage and in litigation from which they dearly wish to escape.
Many of the cases we see in the team concern small businesses, often partnerships and companies. Typically, the shares in any company are held by the husband, although increasingly they're held by the wife. Sometimes the parties hold the shares 50-50, and sometimes shares are held alongside third parties. In ordinary times, the business would be valued by a court-appointed expert, and it is likely that an agreement would be reached whereby one party received more of the cash and other assets in lieu of value in the business. These are not ordinary times, however. The current economic instability means that where an expert has been able to provide a valuation for a business, that valuation is probably already out of date. Where an expert has not yet provided a valuation for a business, they may tell the parties that it is not yet possible to do so because the business has closed down or because the business is operating at a significantly reduced capacity, which makes estimating the future trading of the business and therefore its valuation impossible.
One option that has been discussed is asking an expert to provide a valuation of the business as it was before COVID, during COVID, and as it might be expected to be post-COVID in, say, 6 months or a year's time. And Section 25 of the Matrimonial Causes Act 1973 doesn't confine the court to looking only at the asset as it is at the date of trial. It can consider income, earning capacity, property or other financial resources which either party is likely to have available to them in the foreseeable future. And that enables the court to speculate as to the future value of the business. However, courts have in the past shown an understandable reluctance to move beyond looking at the current value only of an asset and don't often wish to engage in what is seen as speculation as to what may happen in the future. And whilst therefore obtaining a valuation pre, during and post-COVID may provide a broader picture as to the value of the business, it is, we think, difficult to see many courts feeling that this approach will produce a figure reliable enough to be used in dividing the parties' assets.
So how do the parties achieve the divorce that they crave in a way which is fair? The court's function is to evaluate and then to distribute. If it can't perform the first of those tasks, how can it perform the second? And if there is to be an adjournment, how long is that adjournment likely to be for? Certainly for many months, and in some cases, perhaps a year or more. The question for this video is whether there is an alternative, namely dividing the business between the parties so that it does not need to be valued. Whatever it is worth, the parties share it.
Of course, traditionally, the thought of remaining in business with one's ex has been fairly low on the list of a client's priorities. In my career, I could count on the fingers of one hand the number of times a judge has thought that that was a good outcome. And it must be accepted that doing so is fraught with problems. In the last case I did, where it happened, it proved necessary to protect both of the parties with complicated shareholders' agreements, so that one party could not run the business to the disadvantage of the other, but that other could also not interfere with the running of the business. Consideration would also need to be given as to the position of third parties, not only co-owners, but also employees who might suffer from a warring couple running the business. And what is to happen to the income and dividends generated by the business? After all, both parties may need an income from the business, but they may disagree as to the level of dividends to be paid or as to the salary to be paid to one or both of them. These are real problems which need careful consideration, but there may be solutions to them all, and those solutions may provide a better outcome for the parties than a long adjournment. Gemma will now explain why such an outcome might or might not be a good idea.
As Nick has said, in most cases, dividing the business is a nightmare. The last thing that most parties want when they get divorced is to find that they have a continuing tie to the person who at that time they may dislike more than any other person in the world. If the parties truly don't get on, and most importantly, if they don't trust each other at all, then sharing the business is unlikely to be workable and the case may simply have to be adjourned. Equally, if, as is often the case, the directors have a veto over the transfer of shares, which it is clear that they will exercise, that too may be a reason not to go down this route.
But many people don't hate their ex, and many people have a continuing tie to them through their children in any event. Many husbands or wives have also worked in the business and have an understanding of it, which might make them less concerned about taking a share in it or having an ongoing interest in it. And bear in mind that in order to share the business, it is not necessary to take shares in the business. The court has other powers, including ordering the party holding the shares to sell them at a given time and to pay the other a lump sum when they do so. Those shares can be charged either legally or equitably in order to provide the other with security. And in the meantime, income and dividends can be paid from the company, backed by a periodical payments order.
For some people, continuing to share in the business and its profits may actually be a better solution than asking the court to endorse a solution whereby one party has most or all of the safer assets, such as the house and the cash, so that the other can have the business. Often that sort of solution is unfair anyway, but it's traditional and it's undoubtedly what happens in 99.9% of cases. But throw into the mix the likelihood that any other solution might result in a long adjournment, and the prospect of sharing the business suddenly seems rather more appealing.
Of course, the value of a private limited company is extremely uncertain at the best of times. Business owners like to think that they know the value of their company and will often strongly disagree with any expert who has been instructed to value it. It is therefore recognised that the business is the risky asset, and that the true fairest way to share the value of the assets is to share them all. This is what is known as Wells sharing, after the case in which the matter was discussed and in which the Court of Appeal encouraged parties to consider doing just what we are proposing. In fact, like most couples, Mr. and Mrs. Wells didn't want to share the business. Mr. Wells wanted it, and Mrs. Wells wanted more of the other assets. But had they not felt like that, the Court of Appeal would have endorsed an agreement which shared all of the assets between them.
The cases of Martin and XW have recently emphasised that where this is the party's wish and where an expert has been able to provide a valuation for the business, the court is likely to use the expert's valuation in calculating the total value of the assets, and in an appropriate case will simply divide the value of the matrimonial assets in two. In both cases, an expert's valuation was used by the court in calculating the total value of the assets, and the wife received an award equivalent to half the value of the matrimonial assets. In both cases, the wife received cash in lieu of value in the business, although in Martin, the wife also retained some shares. But that sort of approach does not help to find a solution where a valuation of the business is impossible. In those cases, would it be so bad if the court divided the value of the house and cash assets between the parties and also divided the business between the parties? The parties may have to hold their nose, but at least that way they would know that the solution was a fair one, and they would avoid an adjournment.
As we've already mentioned, going into business with your ex is rarely a good idea. On divorce, you generally want to spend less time with them, not more. But there may be some cases where it is more appealing than the alternative. It's always worth thinking about, and now more than usual.
Yes, so let's take the example of a business that was going to be sold soon in any event. In those circumstances, there may be no great difficulty in transferring shares to the other party, let's say the wife, so that she may benefit from the proceeds of sale whenever that happens. The transfer of shares need not necessarily be for 50% of the shares, say where the sale was a couple of years off and work was needed to prepare the company for sale.
Agreed. And in the recent case of Stieg, the Court of Appeal encouraged parties to think of solutions for sharing the value of the business on the basis that bespoke agreements between the parties can deal with matters beyond a court order. You would need careful advice about capital gains tax and holdover relief. Alternatives might be a charge over the shares, or a deferred lump sum payment equivalent to a percentage value of the sale proceeds. There might be a fixed date for payment to avoid the husband putting off the sale indefinitely. And I've just done a case where exactly that happened.
And each party would need to be confident that the other wasn't going to do the dirty on them. So if the parties were going to be or remain joint shareholders, a shareholders agreement might be necessary, or undertakings might be necessary to prevent one party from, for example, diverting income to another company or setting up a Phoenix company. Corporate advice might be required, and that can get expensive. And if I were acting for the wife, I would want the security of a periodical payments order.
But if it was clear, perhaps through a recital in the order, what the parties were trying to achieve, and if one party were subsequently to try to pull a fast one, they could expect the support of the court in making such order as might be necessary to fulfill the will of the court. You could go back to the court under the liberty to apply provision. And it might also be sensible to build into the order the entitlement of one or other or both of the parties to buy out the other within a certain time frame on the basis of a valuation by an expert at some point in the future, once valuations are once again possible.
I agree. It definitely won't suit everyone. If the relationship between the parties has completely broken down, or if there is no trust between the parties, as there often isn't, or if one party understands the business and the other doesn't, it's unlikely to be workable. But if those circumstances don't exist and your client is facing a delay of a year or more, it might be a sensible way out.
We hope that you found this short video useful. If anyone would like to discuss anything that we've raised or any other matters, please don't hesitate to get in touch with one of us or one of our clerks. All of the details you'll find on our website.